When my mother saw my name on the Forbes list, she did not cry. She did not smile. She did not call to say she was proud. She stared at the page for a long time. Looked up at me across a ballroom full of people who suddenly wanted to shake my hand, and said the same thing she had been saying to me in different forms since I was 13. You always did love embarrassing this family. The difference was that this time, nobody around us believed her. And that was new. Because for most of my life, if my mother said I was difficult, people believed I was difficult. If she said I was dramatic, I became dramatic. If she said I was the problem, then somehow, in every room we entered, I was already halfway guilty before I opened my mouth. My name is Maya Bennett. And for most of my childhood, I was not the smart one, the easy one, or the promising one. That role belonged to my younger brother, Ethan. I was the one who asked questions at the wrong time, the one who read too much, the one who wanted explanations when everyone else in my family seemed perfectly comfortable living on a diet of denial, guilt, and polished lies. If this story hits a nerve for you, subscribe now. Not for me, for yourself, because sometimes the stories that stay with us are the ones that finally put language to what we survived. I grew up in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, in a narrow 2-story house with beige siding, weak gutters, and a kitchen that always smelled faintly like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner. The house looked cheerful from the outside. My mother made sure of that. White curtains, seasonal wreaths, fresh mulch in spring. She loved appearances. She ironed them into everything. My father, Robert, sold industrial supplies for a regional company and spent half his life in a car. He was not cruel in the sharp, memorable way my mother was. He was worse in the softer way. He was absent when it mattered, and agreeable when it cost him nothing. He specialized in sighing, looking tired, and letting things happen. My mother, Denise, ran the house like a private court where she was judge, jury, and historian. If something hurt you, she rewrote it. If she was wrong, she revised reality until she wasn't. Ethan was 3 years younger than me. Blonde where I was dark-haired. Loose where I was precise. Effortlessly charming in the shallow way that always photographs well and ages badly. Teachers called him spirited. Neighbors called him such a sweetheart. My mother called him my easy child. I learned young that the family roles had already been cast. At 8, I got in trouble for correcting my aunt when she said bats were blind. I still remember the sound of forks touching plates at Sunday dinner. The yellow light above the table. The sticky peach glaze on the ham. And my mother's expression when she said, Maya, nobody likes a know-it-all. At 10. Ethan knocked a glass pitcher off the counter while spinning in socks across the kitchen tile. It shattered against the cabinet. My mother came running, looked at the mess, and before asking a single question, said, Maya, why would you leave this so close to the edge? At 12, I brought home the highest math score in my grade. Ethan got a participation ribbon for a soccer tournament his team had lost. His ribbon went on the fridge. My paper was set aside because, according to my mother, you're supposed to be good at school. That's not special. The word she liked best for me was difficult. She used it the way some people use a prayer. Difficult child. Difficult mood. Difficult phase. Difficult to love. Though she never said that part out loud. Not because she was kinder than that. Because she was smarter. She knew which words left marks nobody else could see. By 13, She had upgraded from difficult to disappointment. The first time she said it directly. I was standing in the laundry room holding a damp stack of towels against my chest. Ethan had forgotten a history project due the next morning. He was on the couch playing a video game with the volume too high. My mother called from the kitchen asking who had emptied the printer tray and where the poster board had gone. I said I had used the printer for an essay. And Ethan snapped that I always ruined everything. My mother walked in, looked at him, then at me, and said, "This is exactly why your brother can't get ahead. This house revolves around your mess all the time." I laughed. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. And that was the mistake. She stepped closer, lowered her voice, and said, "I am serious. Maya, you are becoming the family disappointment." I remember the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. I remember the smell of detergent and warm cotton. I remember thinking, "Not that hurts." I remember thinking, "So that's the shape of it." Once a parent says something like that, the house changes temperature. You still live there. You still eat dinner. You still hear the television from the next room. But now every sound comes with translation. Every silence means something. Every kindness has conditions. Every mistake confirms a story that was written about you before you were old enough to defend yourself. I became careful after that. Not softer. Not better. Just careful. I started staying late at school. The library was colder than our house in winter. But it was peaceful. The pages smelled like dust and paper glue. And nobody there rolled their eyes when I asked questions. One of the librarians, Mrs. Klein, started setting aside books for me. Business biographies, memoirs, magazines, articles about companies, founders, investors, markets. I liked stories where people built things, not because of the money, because building something was the opposite of begging to be chosen. At home, Ethan failed upward. He forgot homework, and my mother emailed teachers about learning differences he had never been diagnosed with. He overslept and missed the bus. So she blamed the district schedule. He mouthed off to coaches and got benched. So, she said, the adults around him were threatened by boys with leadership energy. Meanwhile, I got a B+ in chemistry, and she asked what had happened to my standards. When I was 15, I entered a statewide entrepreneurship competition through school. The prize was small. Just enough seed money to launch a student business idea. But I treated it like a door in a locked house. I built a proposal for a scheduling platform for home-based service businesses. Nothing glamorous. Just efficient. My principal loved it. My economics teacher helped me polish the financials. For 3 weeks, I stayed up after midnight, refining slides on an old laptop whose fan rattled like it had asthma. The night before the final round, I asked my mother if she could drive me to Columbus. She was sitting at the kitchen table helping Ethan glue fake Roman columns onto a history board he had waited until the last possible hour to start. The room smelled like hot glue, canned tomato sauce, and nail polish remover. Without even looking at me, she said, "Tomorrow?" "Yes. I leave at 8. She sighed. "Maya, your brother has regionals." "For what? He's the alternate?" "He still has to be there. Dad can take him. Your father has work. So can you take me?" She looked up then, slowly, like I was inconveniencing the oxygen in the room. "You're not hearing me," she said. "Your brother needs support. What you're doing is a school thing. It's a finals round. And if you don't win," I stood there in the refrigerator, hum and the weak yellow kitchen light, and said, Then I still need to go. Her mouth tightened. You always make everything a production. My father took Ethan to regionals the next day. My mother stayed home to catch up on errands. I took 2 buses and a ride from my economics teacher, who missed the first half of a family birthday party to get me there. I won second place. Not first, second. I came home holding a certificate. A check. And the kind of excitement that makes your hands shake? My mother looked at the envelope and said, "That's nice. Maybe now you can stop acting like you're destined for Wall Street." I don't know why some moments stay. Maybe because they are too small to justify breaking over. Maybe because they teach you the rules without announcing themselves. That night, I put the certificate in my closet. Ethan's participation plaque stayed on display for years. By 17, the pattern was so established that other people started performing it too. Relatives asked Ethan what colleges he was considering and asked me if I was still doing the computer thing. My mother answered questions about me as if I weren't there. "Maya's smart," she would say, in the strained tone people use when describing weather damage. "But she lacks focus." Or, "Maya has potential if she learns humility." Or my favorite, "Some kids make life easy for their families. Some kids make everything heavier." It's amazing how often a parent can insult you in public while pretending to be concerned. Senior year. I got accepted into Carnegie Mellon with partial scholarship. It was the biggest thing that had ever happened to me. My father hugged me in the driveway because he happened to be there when the letter came. My mother read the packet at the counter, nodded once, and asked how much it would still cost after aid. When I told her, she laughed. Not kindly. Absolutely not. She said, "We are not financing a fantasy because you want to leave the state and reinvent yourself. I have scholarships. You have partial scholarships. I can work. You are not mature enough to manage that kind of pressure." The room went still. My father took off his glasses and cleaned them with the corner of his shirt without saying a word. I asked the question I already knew I should not ask. "What about Ethan?" My mother didn't blink. "What about him? If he gets into an expensive school, would you say no?" "That's different." "Why?" "Because your brother has promise." There it was. Plain. Clean. No euphemism. No performance. Just the truth. Finally dressed in its own clothes. I wish I could tell you I left the room and never cried. I cried in the bathroom with the fan on. I cried quietly because my mother hated noisy feelings. I cried with my forehead pressed against the cool mirror until I could breathe normally again. Then I took the acceptance packet, my scholarship letter, and my laptop to the public library and applied for every grant, aid program, local scholarship, and work-study option I could find. I went to Carnegie Mellon anyway. Not because my parents came around, because they didn't. I pieced it together from aid. Jobs, tutoring, and a small scholarship funded by a Women in Tech Foundation in Pittsburgh. I left in August with 2 suitcases, a comforter from Target, a used mini fridge I bought from an upperclassman online, and $93 in my checking account. My mother helped me pack in the mechanical way someone might wrap a dish they do not like but do not want to replace. She folded shirts. She labeled a storage bin. She reminded me not to embarrass the family by dropping out. At the car, with the heat already gathering in the pavement and cicadas screaming from the trees, she hugged me briefly and whispered, "Try not to prove me right." That sentence sat in my chest for years. College was harder than I had imagined, and kinder than home. The campus smelled like wet brick and coffee and printer ink. I loved it immediately. I also nearly failed discrete mathematics in the first month. Worked 2 jobs. and learned the difference between being smart in a small town and being one capable student in a building full of brilliant people. For the first 6 months, I was mostly tired. Tired in my hands. Tired behind my eyes. Tired in the part of my brain that had always been busy staying one step ahead of blame. But something changed there. Not fast. Not dramatically. Just enough. Every time I solved a problem, nobody had assigned me. Every time I stayed after class to ask a harder question. Every time a professor answered me seriously, instead of treating my curiosity like rudeness. My sophomore year, I met Lena Torres in a product design lab. Lena was from Miami. Wore giant sweaters in winter, no matter how overheated the room was. And had the kind of confidence that made other people tell the truth around her by accident. We were assigned to the same team for a project building tools for small businesses. I mentioned, almost in passing, that my first entrepreneurship project had been a scheduling platform for home-based service providers. She asked me to show her the old deck. I apologized before opening it. That was in high school. I said, "It's rough." She read it in silence. Then she looked at me and said, "Maya, this is not rough. This is early." That distinction mattered. Not bad. Early. By junior year, Lena and I were working nights on a product that helped independent service businesses manage bookings, customer reminders, deposits, and route clustering without expensive enterprise software. Clean, practical, ugly at first, then less ugly. We interviewed dog groomers, mobile mechanics, house cleaners, private tutors, appliance repair techs, and one woman in Allegheny County who sharpened knives out of a van and gave us better product advice than 3 professors combined. I called home less and less, not out of strategy, out of exhaustion. My mother didn't notice until she needed something. Usually it was emotional labor disguised as obligation. "Your brother is stressed. Call him. Your father is impossible lately. Talk to him. Don't forget your grandmother's birthday. Once?" During senior year, she called and asked if I could send Ethan $300 because he had a minor issue with his debit card. The minor issue was that he had driven to Chicago for a music festival, spent his rent money, and assumed someone would clean it up. I said no. She inhaled sharply. "You really have become hard?" "No. I've become broke. You always did know how to make yourself the victim." I hung up and sat on the floor of my apartment staring at my chipped coffee table for a long time. Then I got up, opened my laptop, and sent another pitch deck. That became the rhythm of my 20s. Work. Rejection. Revision. Work again. Lena and I graduated without fanfare from my family. My parents came, but not really for me. Ethan had just transferred to his 3rd college in 4 years after not vibing with 2 others. And my mother spent most of the weekend explaining his situation to anyone who would listen, as if he were a misunderstood artist, wandering through a cruel educational landscape instead of a 21-year-old man who could not finish anything that did not flatter him immediately. At the ceremony, when my name was called, I searched the crowd out of reflex. I found Lena's parents first. They were standing, cheering. Her mother had tears in her eyes. My own family was seated. My father clapped politely. My mother looked down at her phone. I wish that stopped mattering sooner than it did. It didn't. After graduation, Lena and I moved into a tiny apartment in Pittsburgh and turned our product into a real company. We named it North Loop, because every other startup name sounded like a minor allergy medication. We had 1 table, 2 folding chairs, a borrowed monitor, and enough confidence to be dangerous. For a year, our office was half our living room. The radiator hissed all winter. The windows leaked cold. The upstairs neighbor practiced bass guitar after midnight. We lived on grocery store coffee, discounted takeout, and the kind of optimism only tolerated in people too busy to be embarrassed. The first version of the product failed. Not philosophically. Actually, users signed up and left. The onboarding was confusing. The workflow was too broad. We had built something interesting instead of something useful. It was humiliating, which is to say, it was educational. We started over. This time we narrowed everything. One core audience. One specific promise. One pain point solved cleanly. Independent home service businesses with 1 to 20 employees needed to stop losing time, losing deposits, and manually patching operations together through 6 apps and a whiteboard. So we built for them and only them. The second version worked. Slowly, first, then clearly, then all at once. A cleaning company in Cleveland referred a dog grooming chain in Cincinnati. A tutoring service in Atlanta posted about us in an owner forum. A field services consultant wrote a glowing review and called the product the first tool that feels like it was built by people who have actually spoken to small operators. That line got us our first angel meeting. I was 25 when I pitched to real investors in a conference room with glass walls and a table so polished I could see my hands shake in it. I wore the only blazer I owned. Bought secondhand and tailored to stop looking apologetic. My throat was dry. My mouth tasted like burnt coffee and mint gum. One of the investors, a man with perfect teeth and the bored confidence of someone who had never had to earn being taken seriously, asked, "Who handled the real business side?" I smiled and said, "Which part would you like me to explain more slowly?" Lena kicked me under the table. We got the meeting anyway. Years passed in quarters. Payrolls. Customer calls. Fundraising decks. Product releases. Tax deadlines. Airports. Hotel soap. And adrenaline. The more successful North Loop became, the less contact I had with my mother. We spoke on birthdays, some holidays, occasional emergencies. She remained committed to the family mythology in which Ethan was a late-blooming original and I was a brittle overachiever whose success was somehow both inflated and rude. Ethan cycled through careers the way other people cycled through streaming passwords. Real estate, podcasting, crypto, brand consulting, event promotion, creative strategy, every year. My mother announced he was on the edge of something big. Every year. Something happened to prevent his big break from being visible to the naked eye. By 28, I was making more money than both my parents had made combined in a year. I didn't tell them. Not because I was hiding, because I had finally learned the difference between privacy and shame. Around that time, my grandmother, my father's mother, I started calling me more often. Her voice had grown papery with age, but not weaker. She had always been the only person in my family who noticed things without trying to own them. When I was little, she was the one who slipped me library money and asked what I was reading. She was also the one person who once told my mother, at Thanksgiving, "You are much harder on Maya than the child deserves." My mother had not spoken to her properly for a month after that. Grandma called one Sunday afternoon while I was packing for San Francisco. "I saw an article," she said. I was balancing the phone on my shoulder and trying to decide whether I had time to wash one more blouse. "What article? About your company?" My stomach tightened. "Where? Business Journal? Maybe not Forbes yet," she said. Dry as dust, but close enough to scare the right people. I laughed. Then she got quiet. Honey, she said, I need you to hear this from someone who knows your mother and loves her anyway. She made your brother into a promise because she saw herself in him, and she made you into a threat because she did not. I sat on the edge of my bed. One shoe on, one shoe off, staring at the suitcase zipper. Why are you telling me this now? Because you keep acting surprised, she said. And I don't want success to confuse you into expecting honesty. That sentence saved me later. At 30, North Loop expanded into 5 states. I crossed a revenue threshold, our first-year selves would have treated like fiction, and moved into a real office with a view of the river. We hired people who were smarter than we were in entire categories of life. We made mistakes with hiring, corrected them, nearly lost a major client, recovered, launched a feature 3 months late, survived, and kept going. My face started appearing in places that made my mother deeply uncomfortable. Panel photos, articles, podcasts, industry lists. It was not fame. Not really. It was visibility. To some people, visibility is celebration. To families like mine, it is rebellion. The first time my mother confronted me about an article, it was Christmas Eve. My parents' house was hotter than necessary, as always, and smelled like cinnamon candles, Hemklasse, and static from old carpet. Ethan had arrived 2 hours late, wearing an expensive coat he definitely had not paid for. My mother handed me a dish towel and said, too casually, "So I saw your little magazine feature? Okay. You make it sound like you did all of this alone." I looked at her. I didn't say that. You never mentioned family. I stared at her long enough that she had to look away first. Then I said, "That's because they weren't in the room." It was the first time in my life I had answered her plainly without apologizing for the weather afterward. She smiled then, that brittle smile. The one that means she is about to stab you with etiquette. Well, some people remember where they came from. And because Ethan was there, and my father was there, and old versions of me were still stored in the walls of that house like smoke. I said nothing, but I drove back to Pittsburgh that night instead of sleeping over. Snow hit the windshield in soft diagonal lines. The highway was nearly empty. My phone kept lighting up with family group messages about breakfast plans, gift exchanges, and whether anyone wanted leftover pie. I muted them all. Sometimes distance begins as a one-night decision. Then it becomes a life. At 32, I bought my parents a new furnace after theirs failed in January. Not because my mother had changed, because my father sounded old on the phone. And because Grandma had once told me generosity is most honest when nobody can mistake it for surrender. My mother accepted the help badly. That is her signature style. Not thank you. Not no. Just resentment with better posture. A week later she called and said, "Your brother thinks it's a little showy. The way you handled that?" I laughed into the sink while rinsing a coffee mug. How would Ethan have preferred I handle a broken furnace? You don't need to be sarcastic. And you don't need to send him as your messenger. He's trying to protect this family from becoming transactional. I dried my hands, leaned against the counter, and said, "Mom, this family has been transactional for years. I was just never the one receiving anything." Silence. Then the click of disapproval she made with her tongue. "You twist things." "No." I said, "I stopped letting you twist them first." That call ended the way most of our calls ended, with her hanging up as if she had dismissed me from her office. The older I got, the more I noticed something that would have sounded impossible when I was young. My mother was not strongest when she yelled. She was strongest when she defined reality first. That was her true weapon. If she called me selfish before I said no, then my no had to fight through her framing. If she called Ethan sensitive before anyone confronted him, then every consequence looked like cruelty. Once I saw that clearly, her power changed shape. It was still painful, but it was no longer magic. Around this time, Lena got married in a courthouse ceremony with 6 people and good champagne in paper cups afterward. She asked me to stand beside her. And later, after everyone had gone, she leaned against the hood of her wife's car and said, "Your mother still thinks your success is about her." I looked at her. Of course it is. Everything is. Lena smiled. Then you need to decide whether you still want her to understand you, or whether you're finally ready for a life she cannot narrate. That question took me 2 years to answer. Not because I didn't know, because some grief is delayed by achievement. You think once you become successful enough, articulate enough, visible enough, the parent who misread you will revisit the evidence and update the story. They almost never do. And if they do, it is rarely in the language you wanted. When I was 34, Forbes called. Not a mass email. Not a cold intake form. A real editor. North Loop had hit scale. We had expanded nationally, retained profitability while competitors burned cash for attention, and become the kind of company people referenced in industry panels as an example of patient growth. The editor said they were profiling women founders, shaping operational software for underserved markets. I remember standing in the office kitchen holding a glass bottle of sparkling water and staring at the skyline while she talked. The late afternoon sun made the windows gold. Someone in the conference room down the hall was laughing. Print a home. My heartbeat was louder than all of it. After the call ended, I stood still for a full minute. Then I found Lena. She took one look at my face and said, "What happened?" I said, "Forbes." She dropped the folder she was holding. Then she screamed. I screamed. 2 engineers came out of a meeting room thinking the building was on fire. We did the interview 2 weeks later. Then photos. Then fact checks. Then legal review. Then waiting. Always waiting. I did not tell my family. Not out of strategy. Out of self-preservation. I wanted one thing in my life that could arrive without being touched by contempt first. The profile was scheduled to appear online on a Thursday morning and in print the following week. The same week, my hometown Chamber of Commerce was hosting a gala honoring local business leaders and alumni success stories. I had been invited months earlier. Normally, I would have declined. Small-town events came with too much memory attached. But Grandma wanted to go. And at 87, she had earned the right to make unreasonable requests. So I said yes. That decision gave my mother the stage she had been waiting for. The gala was held in a renovated brick event hall downtown. All exposed beams and Edison bulbs and polished floors that reflected the warm amber light. The air smelled like flowers, wine, and the kind of catered chicken that tastes expensive because nobody lets it taste like anything. Women in heels moved carefully over old wood. Men in navy suits performed confidence near the bar. The town had dressed itself up and called it progress. I wore a deep green dress with clean lines and no nonsense. Gold earrings small enough not to announce themselves. And the kind of heels that promised regret by midnight. Grandma wore navy silk and looked like judgment in pearls. She was magnificent. My parents arrived 20 minutes late. Of course they did. My mother entered scanning the room the way certain people scan church, checking whether respect had been arranged correctly in advance. Ethan came with a woman 10 years younger than him who looked exhausted already. When my mother saw me, she stopped. Not because of the dress, Because people were talking to me. A bank executive, a city council member, the director of a regional founders network, 2 local reporters. Nothing she would have considered important 20 years ago. Everything she noticed now. She kissed the air near my cheek and said, "Well, you clean up nicely." Grandma rolled her eyes so hard I nearly laughed. Dinner was assigned seating. My mother ended up across from me at our table, which was either fate or a deeply malicious intern. She spent the first course introducing Ethan to anyone who paused too long. "He's exploring some incredible opportunities." Ethan nodded solemnly through this, like a man bravely surviving weather. Then, during salad, she turned to me and asked, loudly enough for the table, "So what do you actually do now?" I still struggle to explain it when people ask. A few heads turned. She knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted me either too simple or too complicated. Anything but undeniable. I set my fork down. "We build software for home service businesses." I said, "Scheduling, routing, deposits, communication, operations." She smiled faintly. "Right. Apps." Across the table, the bank executive said, "North Loop." "Right?" I nodded. His face lit up. "My sister's company uses your platform. She loves it." Something changed in the air then. Tiny. Electric. My mother saw it too. That was when she got sharper. "How big can something like that really get?" she asked. "I mean, eventually don't these little tech things just sell and vanish?" Grandma took a slow sip of water. I looked at my mother. Her lipstick was perfect. Her posture was perfect. Her need to diminish me in public was perfect and ancient, and suddenly so visible that for the first time in my life, it embarrassed her instead of me. "We're doing fine," I said. She leaned back. "I'm just saying. Some stability matters more than hype." The city council member beside me frowned. Lena, who had driven in that afternoon and was sitting 2 tables away, caught my eye and gave me the smallest shake of her head. "Not yet." So I smiled. Not sweetly. Just enough. "Stability matters a lot." I said, "That's why our customers stay, course by course." My mother kept trying. A joke about my being bossy even as a child. A story about me missing prom because I was too serious to have fun. Leaving out that I had skipped it to finish a funding application after she told me wasting money on a dress would be ridiculous. A comment about how some children need more correction than others. Every time. The table got quieter. Not because she was winning. Because even polite strangers can feel when a parent is trying to pin an old version of their child to the wall. Then came the speeches. The chamber director thanked sponsors, local partners, and hometown success stories who prove that ambition can still begin here. There were applause breaks, bad jokes, a slideshow with too many transitions, somewhere between dessert and coffee. I checked my phone under the table. 3 missed calls from Lena. 1 text from our head of communications. "It's live." For a second, the room narrowed. The clink of silverware got louder. The lights looked hotter. My fingertips went cold. I opened the link. There it was. My face. My company. My name in black serif type under a headline about founders reshaping overlooked industries. Forbes. Not maybe. Not someday. Now. My heart did something strange then. Not a leap. A settling. Like a piece of furniture finally reaching the floor after wobbling for years. I showed Grandma first. Her hands trembled as she took the phone. Then she looked at me over the top of it, and smiled the way people smile when a truth they already knew becomes public enough to stop arguing with. "I told you," she whispered. I hadn't realized my mother was watching. She leaned across the table. "What is that?" Nothing in her voice was casual now. I turned the screen, and everything stopped. "You have to understand. It wasn't just the article. It was the setting. The witnesses. The months of tension already in the room. The fact that my mother had been performing my insufficiency all evening. And suddenly there was my face on a publication she absolutely understood. Not local. Not Nike. Not your little app thing. Forbes. Her eyes moved from the screen to me and back again. Then to the headline. Then to the pull quote. Then to the revenue figure. Then to the line identifying me as founder and chief executive officer. I watched all the years rearrange themselves behind her face in real time. Not into remorse. People romanticize that moment too much. It rearranged into panic. Because the story she had been telling about me no longer matched the room. The bank executive saw the screen first. "Wait," he said. Too loudly. "You made Forbes?" Now heads turned for real. Someone at the next table stood up. A reporter crossed the aisle. The chamber director started walking toward us with the expression of a man who smells publicity. My mother set the phone down carefully, as if it had become fragile and dangerous. And then she said it. "You always did love embarrassing this family." The line was so familiar, I almost answered from the old script. Apologize. Deflect. Minimize. But the room was listening. And for once, so was I. I stood. My chair made a hard sound against the wood floor. Every face around us tilted upward. I don't know whether the speech I gave next came from courage or exhaustion. Probably both. My success does not embarrass this family. I said, "The way I was treated does." The room went silent. Nudgala silent. Church silent. My mother's face emptied. I kept going. "You called me the family disappointment when I was a teenager. You told people I was difficult. Selfish. Dramatic. Arrogant. You made my ambition sound like a personality defect because it was never convenient for you that I had one." A woman near the bar stopped mid-sip. My father looked down at the tablecloth. Ethan stared at me like he wanted the building to lose power. I spent years thinking that if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, became successful enough, one day you would look at me and tell the truth. I heard my own voice then. Steady. Clear. No tremor. No plea. "But you don't want the truth. You want the version of me that kept your version of this family intact." My mother finally stood too. "Maya, stop this right now." "No." One word. Simple. Terrifying. Liberating. "No." I said again. "You don't get to humiliate me for years and then call it private when I answer in public." You could feel people realizing they were no longer watching a misunderstanding. They were watching a system crack. My mother turned pink around the mouth. "I did everything for you." "That is not true. Your father and I sacrificed constantly, and you reminded me of it every time I succeeded without you." She took a breath to interrupt. "I didn't let her. You celebrated Ethan for potential he never had to prove, and punished me for results you could not control. You did not want a daughter. You wanted an audience." There are moments when a room does not gasp because it is shocked. It gasps because someone finally said the obvious thing out loud. My mother looked around for rescue. There was none. Not because people had become brave overnight. Because public proof changes how cowardice behaves. The chamber director stepped closer, then stepped back again. Good man. He understood this was no longer his event. My father finally said my name. Just that. Maya. Not as protection. As warning. I turned to him. Dad, if you want to speak, do it honestly. Don't do that thing where you ask for peace after I'm the one who paid for all of it. His face collapsed inward. That was the first crack I had ever seen in him. Ethan muttered, "This is insane." I laughed once. Not kindly. No. What was insane was expecting me to stay quiet forever. Then I picked up my phone and read aloud a line from the article. Not the revenue number. Not the valuation. This line: Bennett built North Loop after years of being underestimated. Focusing on overlooked businesses other founders ignored. I looked at my mother. That part is true too. I said. The silence after that felt different. Less sharp. Heavier. Gravity. This is the part people imagine ends with a slap. A collapse. Security. Tears. Real life is usually more humiliating than dramatic. My mother sat down slowly because her knees had gone weak. She looked smaller then, which startled me. Not because I had never imagined her small, because I had never seen her become ordinary. Grandma set her napkin on the table with surgical calm and said, "Well, since the truth has finally arrived, perhaps everyone else can stop pretending." A few people laughed nervously. Grandma kept going. "Denise, you have diminished that girl her entire life. Tonight you simply picked the wrong audience. I could have kissed her." My mother whispered. "I don't need this from you." Grandma leaned in. "No, you needed it 20 years ago. That broke whatever thin arrangement was left." My mother pushed back from the table and walked toward the lobby. Spine stiff. Heels sharp against old wood. Ethan followed after a delay. Mostly because he has always preferred leaving to staying when reality arrives. My father remained seated for 3 long seconds. Then rose and went after them without looking at me. I stood there in my green dress, under warm industrial lights, with my face still glowing from every phone screen in reach, and felt the strangest emotion of my adult life. Not triumph. Relief. Pure relief. Like my nervous system had been waiting decades for an official document. Then people started moving. Toward me. Question. Congratulations. Handshakes. A local reporter asking whether I'd be available for a brief comment. The chamber director apologizing for the awkwardness. As if awkwardness were the relevant category. Lena appeared at my side and pressed a champagne glass into my hand. "You okay?" she asked. I looked toward the lobby where my family had disappeared, then back at the room, then at the article, and I said, "Honestly, I think so. Before I tell you what happened after that night, tell me where you're listening from. I always want to know how far these stories travel." I stayed at the gala for another hour. That surprises people when I tell it. They imagine I left in tears or stayed in rage. Neither. I stayed because leaving would have felt like old behavior. I stayed because my life had finally become large enough to remain in the room. I stayed because women came over one by one to say versions of the same thing in different voices. I wish I had done that with my mother. My father still does this to me. My sister got everything too. Thank you for saying it out loud. A retired teacher told me she had taught girls like me for 30 years and recognized the look on my face immediately, the exhausted control of someone who had spent too much of life earning basic respect from their own home. A man from the town newspaper asked if I had a quote about what it means to represent local success. I almost laughed. Then I gave him one anyway. It means your starting point does not get to define your ceiling. That quote ran the next day. My mother hated it. I know because she texted me at 6:14 the following morning. "You blindsided me." Not hello. Not last night was terrible. Not can we talk? You blindsided me. I stared at the message, while hotel coffee hissed into a paper cup downstairs. My room smelled like stale air conditioning and expensive hand soap. Dawn had not fully reached the curtains yet. For the first time in my life, I did not answer quickly. I took a shower. I dressed. I read the Forbes profile again. I ordered toast I did not eat. Then I wrote back, "No. I stopped protecting your version of me." She called immediately. He let it ring. Then again. Then my father called. I answered his. He sounded as if he had aged 10 years overnight. "Your mother is upset." "Your mother?" I said before I could stop myself. And he actually went quiet. "Has been upset by my existence since I was 13. She'll survive one public correction." "That's not fair." "Dad." "Don't." He exhaled. The hotel room heater clicked on. Traffic moved below in soft, wet sounds. "I know last night got out of hand." "No." I said, "Last night got honest." He tried again. "You could have handled it privately." I looked out the window at a city I had built a life in without them and said, "She humiliated me privately and publicly for years. The only difference last night is that witnesses finally had enough context." He had no answer for that. None of them ever did once context arrived. For the next 2 weeks, my family split into predictable factions. My mother called selected relatives before I could and described the gala as an episode. Ethan told cousins I had become arrogant and unstable. My Aunt Marjorie left me a voicemail saying, "No matter how successful you are, honoring your mother matters." I deleted it halfway through. Then something unexpected happened. People did not entirely believe my mother. Not because relatives suddenly became wise, because public evidence had changed the market. Once, a room full of respectable strangers had watched her dismiss my success in real time. The old script got harder to sell. The article was everywhere for a few days. Local media picked it up. Industry pages reshared it. People from town posted screenshots with captions like, "So proud of local founder Maya Bennett," and "Amazing to see one of our own featured nationally." My mother could no longer present me as the family disappointment without sounding ridiculous to anyone outside the family economy. Inside it, of course, she tried. Grandma called and said, "Your aunt asked if you're having a breakdown." I laughed so hard I had to sit down. "And what did you tell her? That if this is a breakdown?" Grandma said, "Everyone should hope for one in Forbes." I loved her more in that moment than I can explain. But relief did not erase grief. That is the part people skip when they tell stories like this. Victory does not arrive alone. It brings mourning with it. For 3 weeks after the gala, I slept badly. My chest felt tight for no obvious reason. I snapped at a product lead over a minor reporting delay and apologized twice. I sat through board meetings while part of my brain replayed my mother's face under amber lights. Not because I regretted what I said, because somewhere inside me, a younger self had still been waiting for another ending. An ending where she heard me and changed. An ending where she read the article, looked at me, and said, "I was wrong. You deserved better. I see you now." That ending did not happen, so I had to grieve it. One evening, Lena came over with Thai food and no advice. We sat on my couch in socks while rain tapped against the windows. The apartment I'd kept as a city place, after moving into a townhouse nearby, still had the old radiator from my early 20s. And sometimes, when it knocked awake in the walls, I could almost hear my first life inside it. After a long silence, Lena said, "You know she'll probably never say it." "I know. You still want her to." I stared at the unopened chopsticks in my hand. "Not exactly. I think I want to stop being the person who waits." Lena nodded. That's different. And it was. Waiting is loyalty in families like mine. Refusing to wait feels like betrayal, even when all you're betraying is your own captivity. A month after the gala, my mother mailed me a handwritten letter. That alone was ominous. Inside was a 2-page note on cream stationery that smelled faintly of her perfume. She wrote that she was saddened by my cruelty, shocked by my need to humiliate her publicly, and concerned that success had damaged my values. She also included 3 lines that told the real truth. I always pushed you because I knew you could do more. Your brother needed gentleness. You needed discipline. One day you may understand what it costs to mother a child like you. I read those lines twice. Then I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and understood something with total clarity. She had just offered me her best version. That was it. That was the apology she was capable of. Not remorse. Just repackaged blame. And because it was her best, I no longer needed to wait for better. So I answered in writing. Not angry. Not emotional. Clear. I told her I would not discuss my character with someone who had built her identity around mischaracterizing me. I told her discipline and degradation were not the same thing. I told her my relationship with her would now require honesty, accountability, and respect. Not nostalgia. I told her I was open to a future connection, if those conditions existed. Then I added one final sentence. Until then, distance is not punishment. It is protection. I signed it, mailed it, and for the first time in my life, I did not spend the next week rehearsing defenses in my head. Because boundaries become real only when your body believes them too. Type karma in the comments if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have known you best. Not because comments change the past. Because naming the pattern breaks some of its spell. My mother did not answer the letter. My father did. Months later, email. Not phone. Classic. He wrote that he had been thinking a great deal and regretted not stepping in more. He said he had always been proud of me, which was painful in its own way because pride that arrives after witnesses is not the same as protection when it mattered. Still, unlike my mother, he seemed to understand that the old arrangement was over. We met for lunch in a hotel restaurant halfway between his town and mine. Neutral ground. Always choose neutral ground with people who confuse familiarity with access. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not weak, just no longer buffered by the house. The routines, the roles. The restaurant smelled like coffee and grilled onions. A television over the bar played muted baseball highlights. He stirred his iced tea for too long before saying anything. I should have done more. I let the sentence sit. Then I said, yes? His eyes filled faster than mine did. That surprised me. I thought keeping the peace was helping. He said, no. I said, it was helping you. He nodded. No defense. That mattered. We talked for an hour. Not enough to repair decades. Enough to tell the truth without decoration. He admitted he had hidden behind my mother because it was easier than opposing her. He admitted Ethan had been overprotected. He admitted he had counted on me to need less because I seemed capable of surviving more. That line landed hard. Capable children pay for their competence in ways families almost never admit. Before we left, he asked, do you think your mother and you can ever come back from this? I looked at him across the table. At the man who had loved me too passively for too long. And said the truest thing I had. I'm not trying to go back. He nodded again. That was the second honest thing he ever gave me. As for Ethan, he texted twice that year. Both times he wanted something dressed as connection. Once, a warm intro to an investor for a media startup with no product. Once, advice on personal brand positioning. I declined both. He called me bitter. I told him I was selective. He stopped texting. My mother and I did not speak for 9 months. In that time, North Loop signed our largest partnership to date. I bought a townhouse with a tiny courtyard and a front door painted deep blue. I started sleeping better. I visited Grandma twice a month. We drank tea from thin porcelain cups and insulted people gently. She was old enough to make me feel young and sharp enough to keep me humble. One afternoon in early fall, she asked whether I missed my mother. The window behind her was open a crack. The air smelled like leaves and someone grilling 3 houses away. Her cat was asleep in a patch of sun on the rug. I missed the fantasy of her, I said. Grandma smiled sadly. Yes, she said. That woman is very easy to miss. She died the next spring. Peacefully. That word is never enough. But it was true. At the funeral, my mother and I saw each other for the first time in almost a year. Grief removes makeup from family dynamics. Not permanently. Just enough to make the bone structure visible. She looked older. So did I. We stood near the flower arrangements after the service, while people moved around us in dark coats and wet shoes. The church smelled like lilies, old wood, and rain-soaked wool. My mother held her gloves in one hand and said, without looking directly at me, "She adored you." Yes, I said, a pause. Then, quietly, she challenged me. I waited. My mother swallowed. She thought I was unfair to you. There it was. Not an apology, but the closest thing to an external truth she had ever allowed into the room. I could have rushed in, demanded more, asked if she agreed, asked whether she finally understood. Instead, I said, she was right. My mother flinched, then nodded once. Tiny, barely visible, but real. That is how some endings come. Not with a collapse, with a fracture small enough to let air through. We did not become close after that. That would be dishonest. We became careful. There were occasional phone calls, limited holidays, no private emotional negotiations, no revisiting my childhood for sport, no pretending. If she made a cutting remark, I ended the conversation. If she compared me to Ethan, he left. If she reached for the old hierarchy, I did not climb back into it. And because boundaries starve dysfunctional systems of oxygen, something unexpected happened. She adapted. Not fully, not beautifully, but enough. Enough to stop calling me difficult. Enough to stop using my ambition as accusation. Enough to ask, once, awkwardly, whether a panel I had spoken on in Chicago had gone well. I said it had. She said, I saw a picture. A longer pause. Then, with visible effort, you looked confident? From another mother. That line would have been nothing. From mine. It was a foreign language. I took it for what it was. A small, late, imperfect thing. And I did not build a home inside it. That was the final lesson. Not every reconciliation deserves residency. Years after the Forbes article, people still ask whether that night changed my life. No. The work changed my life. The product changed my life. The team, the risk, the terrible early prototypes, the long nights, the humiliating meetings, the quiet faith, the discipline no one clapped for, the years of becoming someone my mother could not define out of existence. That changed my life. What the gala changed was something else. It changed who got to narrate it. And maybe that matters just as much. Because when a parent calls you the disappointment long enough, you start performing cross-examination against yourself in private. Every ambition has to clear an invisible trial. Every success feels temporary. Every mistake feels like prophecy. You think healing means proving them wrong? It doesn't. Proving them wrong is satisfying. Healing is when their voice stops being the loudest one in the room after you've won. My mother saw my name on the Forbes list and realized she had been wrong about everything. But that is only half true. What she really realized was worse. She realized I had become undeniable without her permission. And if you grew up like I did, then you know that can feel even better than being loved. Still, here is the part I want to leave you with. Do not waste your best years waiting for the people who misread you to become better readers. Build anyway. Leave anyway. Grow anyway. Become so grounded in your own reality that when they finally see you clearly, it is a footnote, not a rescue. My mother once said I was the family disappointment. Now when she introduces me, she says, "My daughter runs a company. No warmth, no poetry, just fact. And for some stories, fact is enough." If this one stayed with you, subscribe before you go. There are a lot of us, more than our families ever admitted. And if you've ever had to build your own reflection because home handed you a distorted mirror, then you already know why these stories matter. They do not give us new pasts. They give us language. Sometimes that's the first real inheritance we ever get.